All right. So we're going to get started. If people keep showing up, I'll just admit them as they come in. But welcome to our third session of Nick's New Knowledge. Tonight, we're going to be talking about free speech in schools. Our first lesson, we talked about free speech in the First Amendment in relation to Facebook's advisory council on free speech. Tonight, we're going to be talking about it in an area that I know impacts all of you, and that is free speech on and off campus. And that's because there's a Supreme Court case coming up tomorrow, actually, that deals with this exact issue. So at the end of tonight's session, hopefully you'll all be prepared if you want to listen to that argument tomorrow and feel really, really educated on what's going on in this case. So as a refresher, let's just think back to our first session on the First Amendment, or if you've learned about this in school before, but just as a reminder, First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law. So it says Congress, the federal government is who is addressed in the First Amendment, shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. The easiest way to remember that, if you were ever tested on it, what the six freedoms are in the First Amendment, is the acronym GRAPES. That's why I put that in here. Now, tonight we're just talking about the free speech portion of this. Now, remember, originally this applied only to the federal government. Congress shall make no law. Then after the 14th Amendment, it became applicable to the states through what's called the Incorporation Clause. And then finally, for our purposes tonight, that means that it also applies to schools. So if you didn't know already, you now know that public schools have to abide by the First Amendment and every amendment. A private school does not. And so free speech rules might be very, very different if you go to a private school. But if you go to a public school, they have to abide by the First Amendment. And that's what's at issue in this case. Let's take a look at some famous free speech cases. Some of these you might have heard of already, but they're really key to understanding what's going on in the current case before the Supreme Court tomorrow. So first, student speech case was in West Virginia v Barnett, 1943. This was a case of the Pledge of Allegiance in school, and a group of people that did not want to recite the Pledge of Allegiance decided that they were going to sue the school to have that right to not speak. Supreme Court sided with them, said that if you don't want to speak, you don't have to speak. That's part of free speech, is actually the freedom not to speak. No one can force you to speak. And so a public school cannot force you to recite the Pledge of Allegiance if you don't want to. And that right has been established since 1943. Next case, Tinker v. Des Moines. This is the most important case on students' free speech rights. It was during the Vietnam War. A group of middle schoolers named Mary Beth Tinker and her brother John Tinker decided to wear a black armband to protest the war in Vietnam. They were suspended by their school. They then sued the school, saying that their First Amendment rights were violated, and the Supreme Court agreed that their First Amendment rights were violated. The key here is that this case said students do have free speech rights in school, as long as they're not causing a material and substantial disruption to the learning environment. Much more about Tinker later. Next case, 1986, the 80s, Bethel School District v. Frazier. This is a case where a high school student, a senior named Matthew Frazier, was giving a speech in front of the whole school in the auditorium. He was nominating one of his friends to run for class president, and the speech was full of sexual innuendos. He didn't use any vulgar language, no swearing, anything like that, just innuendos. And the principal didn't like it, and so the principal suspended him from school. The Supreme Court took up this case, and they agreed that the school could suspend him for this lewd language. And so this was the first case where the Supreme Court did not side with the student and sided with the school. 1988, similar circumstance, Hazelwood v. Kuhlmeyer. This is a case where a group of students that wrote for a student newspaper tried to publish two stories, one about divorce and one about teen pregnancy, which to us in 2021 might seem like fairly safe topics to discuss in a student newspaper, but 1988, not necessarily the case. And so the school prevented the newspaper article from being published. The students sued the school, again, claiming their First Amendment rights were violated. Supreme Court said, sorry, we agree with the school here. Since it was a newspaper that was being paid for through school funds, the school had the right to say what could and could not be published. And so students lost out in that case. Then again, 2007, this is the most recent school speech case. Again, the student loses here. This is Morris v. Frederick. It was a case out of Alaska where a student held up a banner that outside of the school during a school sanctioned event that said "Bong hits for Jesus." Now, people really didn't understand what that meant. The student himself said that it was nonsensical. It just was a joke. It wasn't making any kind of political statement there. And the Supreme Court decided that that speech was not protected, that the school could suspend him for that. And that's because they interpreted it as promoting illegal drug use. And if you are promoting illegal drug use, that's something the school should be able to protect against. Now, that's a lot of case law there, but it's essential to kind of understanding this because you're going to hear about these cases tomorrow. If you're listening to the current Supreme Court case, I guarantee you will hear lawyers citing Tinker, Bethel, Hazelwood, Morris. You'll hear all those names. If you want to read more about them, I put a link to Oye, or you can just Wikipedia them. Okay, so what's the general rule about speech in school? This came from Tinker, and you're going to hear about this in tomorrow's case as well. It's that students have free speech rights in school, so you do, as long as you are not causing a material and substantial disruption to the learning environment. That's the key phrase, a material and substantial disruption to the learning environment. What are some examples of a material and substantial disruption? Well, some basic ones are yelling in class. If you are causing that kind of disruption in class, you can be removed from the classroom, right? That makes sense because then the teacher can't teach and other students can't learn. Using profanity or lewd language, that falls under this. We know that from Bethel. Promoting drug use, we know that from Morris. Or using harassing or threatening language in school. All of those things are not allowed, and a school can regulate it and punish you for using that. Which brings us to our current case. Mahanoy Area School District v. BL. Now, BL is used here because the student is a minor in this case. This school district is in Pennsylvania coal country. If any of you are near this area and know any of the details more intimately than me, then I'd love to hear about it. But just as a quick refresh of what's going on here, I wanted to show you the format that you would actually use in law school if you wanted to present a case, right? You would start with the facts of the case, do a little case history, and then talk about the question presented. So let's pretend we're all in law school here, and I'll quickly go over the facts, the case history, and the question presented. If you read the article that I sent from the Washington Post, then you have an idea of what happened already, but I think this is a good refresher for you. So this is what happened. A freshman girl back in, I think 2016 this was, she gets cut from the varsity cheerleading team. She doesn't make the varsity cheerleading team. She makes just the JV cheerleading team. She's upset by that. She's upset that some other girls made the team over her. And so she goes on Snapchat and posts a picture of her giving the middle finger along with one of her friends and saying F school, F softball, F cheer, F everything. And she did this on a Saturday afternoon in a convenience store. So she wasn't at home and she wasn't in school. She was out with her friends. This snap gets sent to about 250 people and it dissolves within 24 hours, like you probably know. One person, though, took a screenshot of this, which can often happen, and showed it to another student who happened to be the daughter of one of the cheerleading coaches. So cheerleading coach sees this and is not happy about it. What does she do? She decides to suspend her from the cheerleading team, basically kick her off for the year. The school decides that they're okay with this and they uphold the suspension. Now, It then goes to the district school, the district level, and the school district also agrees with this. So what happens? The girl, along with her parents, because she's a minor, sues the school district, arguing that her First Amendment rights have been violated. The first judge, the district court judge, the lowest level that this goes to, rules in favor of the young girl, saying that her speech was not disruptive to the learning environment. So they apply the Tinker standard, say it's not disruptive to the learning environment. And that she needs to be reinstated. And she does. She gets reinstated at the school, and she makes the varsity squad during her junior and senior years, and she's actually in college now. Well, the school didn't like that, right? The school wants to set a precedent that they can actually prohibit this kind of speech off campus. And so the school appeals that decision. They appeal to the Third Circuit Court. So this is the second level of courts before we get to the Supreme Court. The school appeals here, but they lose again. So this is the second time the school loses. The Third Circuit rules in favor of the student, saying that, to make a really broad ruling, saying that the school can't regulate off-campus speech. So the school appeals again for a third time, right? That you'd think, why wouldn't the school let this go? If the girl already graduated, like why are we even messing with this anymore? It doesn't matter. She didn't make the cheerleading squad. Now she made it as a junior and senior. What's the big deal? Well, the school thinks that this is a big deal, and they want to preserve this right to regulate off-campus speech. So they appeal to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court decides, we'll take the case. And so tomorrow we're going to be hearing arguments in this case. And so the question that's before the court is, does the First Amendment prohibit public school officials from regulating off-campus student speech? So seems like a fairly straightforward question. Okay. So who is on which side of this? This has become a national issue. You might not have heard too much about it. There's only been a few articles written, but this is going to be a landmark decision. And so there are very powerful organizations and people behind each of the sides to this argument, because it's going to decide what happens with school speech going forward. So on the school district side, and some of these groups you wouldn't necessarily think are usually on the same side of things. So on the school district side, you have anti-cyberbullying groups. You have the National Women's Law Center. You have the Anti-Defamation League. And you have the Biden administration, all saying that the school should be able to punish off-campus student speech if it's causing a disruption in school. On the student side, you have many parent interest groups. You have many religious liberty groups. You have Mary Beth Tinker and John Tinker, the original students who preserved the right to free speech in schools. You have the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. They're the ones who are who are arguing the case on behalf of the young girl. And then you have 9 Republican state attorney generals. And so I put this up here to show you that it's not always clear who's on which side of issues. When it comes to the Supreme Court, it's not as clear cut as Democrats and Republicans, right? The ACLU is generally seen as a more liberal organization, whereas obviously Republican state attorney generals are Republicans, but they're actually on the same side of this issue because it's complicated. Now, how do I know this? Where did I find this out, that these groups are on each side of this issue? Well, it's because when a big case goes before the Supreme Court, each of these interest groups, if they want, could submit what's called an amicus curiae brief. Now, this brief just means that they're not part of the case. They're what's known as friends of the court, and they're allowed to weigh in on it. So the Supreme Court is actually reading why the ACLU thinks that the student should have these free speech rights. And so all these groups are able to submit these briefs. And it's really interesting. If you want to read some of them, they're all online. Some of them are hundreds of pages long. Some of them are just 10 or 15 pages, but they give you a great insight into what these groups really stand for, what they value, and how they come down on this issue. So first question I have for you is, does it surprise you who is on which side of this argument? And I'll put this back so you can see it. But does this surprise anyone who is on which side of this argument tomorrow?
I would say the one group that surprises me is the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, because I think, or at least my assumption is, like, a religious group would more so be on the side of like not saying profanity.
Interesting. Yeah. So why do we think then, what argument do you think that they are making for the student? Why do you think they're on the student side here?
Um, because, or at least, uh, honestly, I don't know. Like, I know, like, I would be on the student side, but I don't know why they would.
Yeah, that's okay. Does anyone want to offer the argument that they think a religious liberty group might be making for the student?
I'm not entirely sure because I like don't exactly know, but I would assume maybe it would be like if a student posts like a picture of them doing something religious, right? Like showing religious affiliation, that that speech wouldn't be able to be censored by a school district if for some reason it decided to, go against like religious liberty.
Yeah, I think you're really onto it. If you read the brief, you can see that they think that sure this case might be about obscenity in a speech, but the next time the school tries to regulate something, maybe it'll be about a religious custom, and maybe it'll be off campus. And so if you're walking into your church, your synagogue, or your mosque, and you post a picture of yourself there, maybe somehow the school will be discriminatory against you. And so that's what religious liberty groups are worried in this case. And so it's interesting that they're willing to defend someone who is using profanity here, and that's because they're more concerned about the broad free speech rights and not just this one narrow case. They recognize that this one case could be used to justify more punishment from schools in the future. Are there any other groups on here that surprise you on which side they come down on?
Well, normally I think like politicians bipartisanly would go with the school district since they have a history of like I guess we have I'm surprised like bipartisan usually they are against like I think free speech in schools. So I'm surprised like that the Biden administration and we're like they both took a different side. So Biden administration went with the school district against freedom of speech outside of school, and then the Republican state attorney generals went with the student for freedom of speech outside of school grounds.
Yeah, I actually wasn't. I was not sure which side the Biden administration would fall on this until I started reading more.
Yeah,
about
I'm not really too surprised about that. One thing that I'm definitely not surprised about is the Anti-Defamation League, because I have known in my own community how they like to get into other people's business and try to, silence people for what they're saying, even if it's really not that big of a deal. Yeah.
And what about what argument do you think the anti-cyberbullying groups are making to support the school here? What do
I
you
think it would be maybe the obscenity type thing, because I think that the reason why we should side with the student is not because of what the student said necessarily. It's about what this could mean later on, because schools shouldn't have the power to regulate and punish us for what we post outside of or what we do outside of school. It's I feel like it's really not about what she did, because
Right, it's much bigger, right?
it's much bigger than that.
Yeah, it's much bigger, exactly. And so could someone like put their lawyer hat on and make the argument? Let's say you're an attorney for an anti-cyberbullying group. Like your mission is to prevent cyberbullying, and even though this case doesn't have to do with bullying, there's no evidence she was bullying at all. She was just talking about the cheerleading team. What's the argument for the school here if you're a anti-cyberbullying group?
I would say I think that it would mostly just be, and same thing with the Anti-Defamation League. If someone is, if someone has like a extremist affiliation, let's just say outside of school, they would probably want to side with the school district just in this case, because like if for some reason, right, for a cyberbullying thing, if someone was going around and cyberbullying a bunch of students, the school districts wouldn't be able to do anything about it, because that speech may be considered protected. And it may be the same thing with the Anti-Defamation League. So if, for example, maybe someone posted a picture of a swastika on like Snapchat or something like that, then a school district wouldn't be able to do anything about it. So I think that's why they're siding with the school district.
Exactly. And they're worried that content off campus could affect on campus. So if a student is bullying someone online from home on Snapchat or TikTok or wherever, they're worried that the effects of that could impact the school, like the students learning, say, when they're in the building, and they want to give the school the right or the power to regulate that, basically.
Nick, I have a question kind of more broadly about the Supreme Court. This whole idea of like setting a precedent is really interesting to me, because obviously a lot of these groups are only siding with a certain side, not because maybe they care about the case in particular, but because of what it's going to mean for the future. So to what extent do you think the whole setting a precedent aspect influences the actual decision that the Supreme Court makes? Like, and is that like ethical for them to like make a decision based on the precedent besides like the case itself?
Great question. So one, with Supreme Court cases, it's 99.9% because of precedent and not the actual case that's at hand. A lot of times the case has actually been pretty much resolved. Like in this case, the girl made the cheerleading squad and she's in college now. So there's no remedy the Supreme Court can give her to make it better. And the same thing with the school. The school shouldn't care too much about her anymore. She's gone. She's not, she's not there. And so the court is doing this for the future, for precedent, and for everyone else in the country. And I do think that's ethical. And I think if we were to narrow our decisions, court decisions, to just the controversy at hand and not to apply to others, then you'd have to have like many more court cases. This kind of saves us time and resources for the court to decide an issue like this. And then only if another issue comes up that's slightly different do we need to bring it before the Supreme Court, basically. Does that answer your question, Madison?
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thanks.
Great. I see a couple people with hands up. You can just go ahead and speak.
So I just wanted to speak more about like why, like, because I saw like someone was surprised, I guess, at the Biden administration side with the school district. What I posed, like, I'm like not surprised because we have like a history, like presidents have a history of supporting the establishment. I read A People's History of the United States. You could really see a lot of examples of that in that book. Republican or Democrat, they all do it. And the school districts help make us factory workers or obedient citizens, and taking away our freedom of speech, especially outside of school, will help them control us more and make us more obedient. This obedience makes us more likely to support them and support the establishment and support society around us and not want to rebel against it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. You're right on the history of presidents. You're right, Republican or Democrat, throughout these other Supreme Court school cases, they've all supported the school district. You're not going to find, whether it was George W. Bush's administration, the Reagan administration, the Johnson administration, Nixon administration, you're not going to find one who was siding with the student on a free speech issue case. And you're right, because they want to promote that kind of authority and that kind of governance that the school is trying to impose by regulating student speech. Anna?
Yeah, so I'm not confused as to why. I mean, I was slightly surprised on what side the Biden administration was on, but I'm more confused about like why the presidential administration is getting involved with the court case in the first place. Why does this happen? I'm sorry if this was already covered. I haven't gone to previous new knowledge sessions, but like why does that sort of thing occur, and how influential is a presidential administration being involved? Also, just a comment, I had something to say and I totally forgot. I'm sorry, it's embarrassing.
Okay. If you think of, I'll start answering your question. If you think of it, you can just hop back in. So you're right that it does seem weird that a case involving a small school district in Pennsylvania needs to have the the executive branch weigh in, especially the president and his administration. But it's not uncommon. A lot of times when a case reaches the Supreme Court, there's actually not that many that get to the Supreme Court each year. There's only like around 80 or 90. And so there is room for the president's administration to weigh in on this. And so definitely not uncommon. Whether they should or not, that's a question that, we can debate, but there's, a long history of presidents weighing in on this. And to be clear, I doubt that Joe Biden himself has done a ton of thinking on this, very narrow issue. He has a solicitor general and a team of attorneys that kind of work through these and produce the briefs. And so they'll present the issue to him. They'll present the pros and cons of going on each side of this. And then he would kind of direct them where to go. And that holds true of past presidents as well. The other reason I think the Biden administration is on the school district side is because they're very aligned with anti-cyberbullying groups, and they're really concerned about bullying and online bullying, as was the previous administration. That was Melania Trump's main issue, was anti-cyberbullying. And so I would suggest that like any president is probably going to fall on that side of this and not really fall on the individual student rights side of it. But maybe in the future, another president will. I just would be surprised if they fall on the individual rights side of it. All right, so let's ask a couple more questions of you, and then I have, go ahead, Natalie.
If the case rules on the side of the school, would that mean that in the future, no schools would be allowed to suspend kids or remove them from school for cyberbullying?
So if they rule for the school, then the school could punish students for cyberbullying.
Sorry, I meant for the student.
Oh yeah. So that's why this case is such a big deal, is that if they rule for the student here, we'll have to read the opinion, obviously, of what the Supreme Court says. But if they say that schools do not have a right to regulate off-campus speech online, then it's open season, basically, for what students can say online, and the school can't do anything about it. Yeah, this would be a binding precedent. The court could go like halfway in between, which we'll talk about. They could say that schools can regulate off-campus speech, but they need to prove that it's really, really bad, and there needs to be a test for that. And they might say that in this case, it wasn't that bad, but in another case, it might be. I think someone brought up the example of like posting swastikas or like serious bullying. Maybe that is something the school can regulate. But if it's just like run-of-the-mill profanity or like criticizing a teacher, maybe not. They might develop a test for this. The Supreme Court often develops tests for these kinds of things. And so it'll be really interesting to see if they do that. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about this already. But what arguments do you think the school will make tomorrow? Does anyone want to put on their lawyer hat and just give me the best argument the school has for why they should be able to regulate off-campus speech, including what this girl said? Ethan?
Well, because of what we said about the freedom of speech, how students have free speech as long as they're not causing like material and substantial disruption to the learning environments. I don't think that this would be like in that type of situation. You're technically not in a learning environment when she posted that obvious Snapchat with her profanities. So I definitely think that the people who are arguing for her are going to bring that up and say that, this didn't exactly disrupt individuals, although it might have caused like people to feel like certain emotions towards her and her like her obvious, rude words. It didn't exactly take away from the learning experience that schools brought. So I think that's like something they would say.
Great.
I think that the school would make the argument that they need to punish people for bad behavior that they do outside of schools, outside of the school also, especially like bullying or just saying bad stuff about the school in general. and they want to be able to remove kids or suspend them just for it's probably more about their actions too, also outside of school.
Okay. Roman?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, I think the biggest argument is the precedent and the whole slippery slope argument, I guess. Because right now, while the issue may be about a girl complaining about her cheer team, like this, as you mentioned, it could kind of turn into a free-for-all. And issues that happen outside of school are not like mutually exclusive from like what happens in school. So like if someone's being bullied, for instance, in school or outside of school, regardless of where it takes place, it's going to affect the way that they interact with other students, the quality of education that they receive. And so I think that that's like a huge argument as well.
Great. Anybody else can jump in. And if you want to talk about the argument that the student will make, you can hop on that too.
I just want to say, like, this case is really important just for like the fact that I don't think like schools can just use the excuse if like the school district wins to censor any kind of freedom of speech. I don't think it has to be cyberbullying. Like as I was saying, like they want obedience in society. So if like students maybe are protesting or going on strike against the school system, or they could censor that speech and get them suspended for the First Amendment, since it might not apply outside of school grounds.
It's a good point.
If that happens,
it's a good point. You could see the lawyer for the young girl arguing that today it's just some random profanity on Snapchat, but what if another person posts a valid criticism of the principal? What if the principal makes a rule that they disagree with and they want to post about it online? And then should the school be able to punish them for that? I mean, that seems like pure political speech. And isn't that what the First Amendment's meant to protect? That could be a good argument for the student.
Yeah, I think mostly, I think what the school will argue, kind of like what, sorry, I forgot the name. Kind of like what Madison was saying, sorry. Is that, in cases of cyberbullying or in any sort of, maybe if there is a protest against the school, that's going on outside of the school campus, I think what they'll really rule on is that, or what they'll really argue is that there is activities and speech that goes on outside of school that affects the like educational quality, and because it's a public institution and its purpose is to really make people better and educate people, then it could disrupt that. But I think at the same time, there definitely needs to be, I think one of the things that the student may argue on, the student's lawyer may argue on, is that there are alternative ways to deal with like cyberbullying and stuff like that, so you don't necessarily need to go through the school. And even then, I think like that's really an extreme, because I do think cyberbullying will be covered in the opinion, and they'll talk about how they may connect it to real bullying in person. There's probably, I imagine there's probably like some psychological groups that may weigh in on this, stuff like that. But I do think that in any case, at the most extreme, where the ruling is really just 100% or zero, where it's like, okay, schools can't censor any kind of speech that's going on outside of the school campus. I think that there is a very strong argument that you can make that there are other ways to deal with cyberbullying. There are other ways to deal with extremism and stuff like that, that don't necessarily involve the school.
Thank you, Roman.
I had at least a question to pose. Obviously, you don't know yet or whatnot, but I'm wondering if it passes, like what would be the extent of that? Because I know this was like a like something she wrote on Snapchat. So I'm wondering, would it also be related to video? So say someone films you saying something bad about the school or bad about just bad things in general. Like, would that now be to apply so they could like send in that video? Like, how would it work? Would it have to be that's the one that like posted it, or would it have to be only in text, or like what extent that would?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is why we have so much litigation, right, is because every new scenario would probably produce another court case if someone's willing to challenge it. So let's say that scenario you posed happens in 3 months. A student is filmed, doesn't know that she's being recorded, and she's filmed criticizing the school, saying "f you, f you, f you," and say this decision has come down in favor of the school. Well, the school would probably try to punish her for that. She might argue, though, that she didn't consent to being videoed, that she didn't actively post it in the same way that this girl did on Snapchat. And so that would create a new set of facts that would require a new set of analysis. It would need to be interpreted by a new court. And so that would, again, work its way up through the legal system. Would it reach the Supreme Court? Probably not. The court, like I said before, can only take like 80 or 90 cases a year, when there are tens of thousands of cases that come before them that people are trying to get there, but they can't take them. They don't have the resources to do that. And so they probably won't take a case like this for another 20 or 30 years. And so it's going to be left up to lower courts to interpret this decision and try to apply the law to the facts of the case. And that's what judges do. Great question.
So I just want to, like, I saw Madison was saying like how public schools might be like an extension of the government, because I'd like to talk about like how like the government has violated freedom of speech in like the past and currently. And a lot of the times the Supreme Court was like, nah, it's fine. Like during World War I, there was a case against, I forgot, it was like some sedition act during World War I.
Yeah.
This guy criticized the war, and then they said that that the freedom of speech didn't apply since it was going against national
security.
Yeah, national security. And they use that a lot. And that's how the Espionage Act came in, the Patriot Act, a lot of acts that like violate freedom of privacy, freedom of speech. So they are an extension of the government, but the government has a history of violating freedom of speech. So you can kind of see like they're kind of connected. So
yeah, and you're right. And those are justified more during war times. Like obviously World War I, World War II, you see that much more often. It was interesting though that in Tinker happened during the Vietnam War. And the Supreme Court did uphold the rights of the students to protest the Vietnam War with their black armbands, because that was purely political speech. And they didn't think that it was causing a disruption in school. And so that's why Supreme Court actually sided with the students in that case. Anna?
Yeah, so it's interesting to me that these days that it's coming up now, because these days youth hold more power in terms of schools than ever. Youth are directly involved in reopening decisions. Like my sister goes to public school and is on like the task force to decide when to reopen. And she's a student, and people come to her all the time and are like, and these kinds of things. And like, what worries me about this case is how it could limit student activism, because I know, for example, like student petitions are a big thing. Like in my town, a bunch of high schoolers made a petition and it went to the town council, and it's going to get passed, and they're basically representing a school club. And so that's really concerning. And that's why I think that the girls' lawyers, the lawyers for BL, will argue for a midway kind of thing. Like, yes, we need to be against cyberbullying, but these kinds of things just simply aren't, like, that it isn't one or the other. Because I think it's bad both ways, but it's really concerning about student activism.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because it makes me think of, or at least, like I remember when I was in, like, I'm a junior in high school now, but I remember when I was in 7th grade, and there was this girl, and she had come to school in like a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, and the faculty like made her change out of it and remove it. And also like how things, I guess it would be different between districts as well, because within, I guess, like my district, it's not necessarily as direct of like students on boards like doing, I guess, really impactful stuff, but more so on the school level. So I guess it could affect student activism and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's the concern from the student side. Essentially, is that the kind of slippery slope argument that who knows what this could lead to, them censoring.
I think that political speech is a big issue because I feel like a lot of people could take anything as a extremist symbol or any type of political attire, even if you're not even wearing that to school, like she was saying before. Like, even if you are posting that online, I know that people will post stuff online and then people that see it online will find out their school and then email their school administration and try to get them suspended. So if the school didn't like what they were doing, then they could actually suspend those people because of what someone online saw and told them about. So I think it would be very damaging to not be able to express your opinions online t- because of the fear that you could be suspended from school.
Yeah, an interesting thing you brought up there is that she actually didn't intend for this to go to anyone at the school, right? She thought that this was just some of her friends on Snapchat, and she knew it would disappear in 24 hours. It was only when it was forwarded by someone else that um, that it became known. And so there's an element of like, what was the intent here as well? Natalie, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, so if the case goes according to the student side, saying that free speech outside of school is like protected, would that like include hate speech? So if someone uses social media outside of school or like and uses hate speech, would they be able to be punished in school, or would ruling in the student's favor prohibit that from happening?
Well, so that's what the school board is going to say. That's what the lawyer for the, if you listen tomorrow, the school board is going to say, if you rule in favor of BL, then it's going to open up all kinds of avenues for hate speech online that schools can't regulate, and would cause all kinds of problems for us. And so they're gonna try to hammer that home, that argument. Whereas on the young girl side, they're going to say, well, it's not the school's job to be regulating that. Like, there are other mechanisms for dealing with speech off campus, right? This has not posed problems before. Like pre-internet, we know that students were doing bad stuff outside of school, and it wasn't a problem for other people to be regulating that besides the school itself. So we'll see how they rule, Natalie. They might like narrow the decision to make it that they rule in favor of BL, but they say it's because she wasn't creating a material and substantial disruption. And they might leave open the possibility for schools to regulate off-campus speech if it does cause that disruption, and that might include hate speech. So they kind of might rule in between.
I think we kind of covered this in one of the first Nick's New Knowledge. I think it was a thing about a Nazi protest or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like, I mean, obviously it's wrong, but I feel like students should be able to, have a Nazi flag. Even, I mean, we all can agree that that's wrong, but at home, at off campus, they should be allowed to do that, because as long as they're not hurting anyone, I mean, it's their opinion.
Right. And so the argument is, instead of punishing them for that, the punishment would actually come from kind of social ostracization. Like, people would not want to be associated with them anymore, and the speech on the other side would be stronger and prevent people from like kind of joining that cause. That's the argument that actually the ACLU made. Like, you're right, Hannah, in a case in the 1970s when a group of neo-Nazis wanted to march in a town called Skokie, Illinois, and they let them march, and the ACLU defended that march. And the argument was, you can't suppress that political speech. Instead, you just need to have more speech on the other side that is anti those neo-Nazis. That was the solution, not for the government to prevent it from getting out there. I see some other hands up. You can go.
I completely agree with that. I think the reason the ACLU is supporting this is because one of their I don't know, what is it called?
Lawyers?
Huh?
One of their lawyers?
No, well, they stand for liberty. So that's why I think that they are supporting the student side, and they have supported these liberties in the past.
Correct.
Because then the people that are against it will usually be more, and they will be against it because the people are the ones that should have the power, not the government.
And I guess with this talk, like, it made me think of, I guess this is another anecdote, but it's like, I remember, what is it? It was during early quarantine, where I was brought up, like, one of my classmates, they were a post, like something they posted on Snapchat, like them doing blackface, some Middle Eastern girl doing blackface, and then saying that like some Black classmate should like be a slave. And it went viral on Twitter. And then like a bunch of people were like messaging the superintendent of like HIC, saying like, oh, like this girl, she should be, I guess, like expelled, and she shouldn't be able to like return to the school or whatever. And it ended up like she was suspended for a few days, but the school really couldn't do anything about it, I guess. So
yeah, and this case will clarify, or hopefully clarify, issues like that. Their schools have been kind of asking for more guidance on this for the last 10 or 15 years, really since the explosion of online activity. And so you're right, the school might have felt like their hands were tied behind their back. They didn't want to get involved in potential litigation. But this case might clarify for them what they can and cannot do.
I'd like to clarify what a lot of people said about like the American Civil Liberties Union. Like, I watched a lot of Supreme Court videos on YouTube. Like, they support a lot of the student side and like kind of these free speech cases, and also about like the hate speech. Like, yeah, I personally think that it might be threatening, but I don't think that schools should be the ones restricting that, because of just freedom, because adults are able to still, you know, do hate speech. Like there's like there's like people are waving the Confederate flag, stuff like that, and they don't get censored, even though I think that it's bad. But
yeah, just to clarify, as long as they're not posing an imminent threat.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah, because so Ohio v, I forgot what that case was, but
yeah, yep. No, you're 100% right, Brandenburg, and so if, just so everybody's clear, we did talk about this during the first session. Even adults, if you are making a direct threat or inciting violence, which sometimes hate speech falls into, if you're being specific about it, then you can be punished for that speech. You can't hide behind the First Amendment and say you're protected if you're inciting violence. So just so we're clear on that. Other comments?
I guess what I was going to talk about a little bit is kind of the I think maybe one of the fundamental differences between when we're looking at like free speech cases for kids and free speech cases for adults is that really, like, let's just be honest, kids are all dumb. We all say really dumb stuff sometimes. And I don't think that, you know, I think that some, especially, you know, if we look at people who engage in hate speech and stuff like that, sometimes like they believe in it, but, you know, like, why is that, right? Maybe their family members believe in it. Maybe it's caused by something that they can't necessarily control, right? And so I think that the better way is not to treat this as a punishment, but like a learning opportunity, right? And so I think that schools right now are very, you know, penalizing, really. I think that almost any sort of trouble that you get in with a school district always ends up in some sort of punitive measure. And so I think that instead of taking the same approach that we take with adults, I think that we should really take it as a learning opportunity. And so when these cases are presented, I think that it's better to go with like a restorative justice approach, something like that, something that's outside of the school district. And I think that that's why really, if you say something or you engage in something that is, you know, like hate speech, something like that outside of the school district, I don't believe that the school district should get involved, just because, first of all, it's not on campus. And second of all, when they do get involved, I think that it ultimately won't foster the same learning opportunity that an ulterior way might, right? So I think that is one of the differences too, is that, there's definitely less, I feel like there's always less intent behind, what a minor says compared to someone who's an adult. But yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. That's a really good reminder. And the court system treats juveniles differently for a reason, right? Your brain hasn't fully developed now until 25, we think. I mean, previously the thinking was kind of 18, but it takes even longer. And so to punish punitively, like you're saying, a 14-year-old, might not be the best route. And if the school had taken a slightly different route with this, maybe the case wouldn't have ended up going to the Supreme Court. But suspending her from the team for a year, maybe that was too harsh, and maybe that's what led to all this. But it is going to be really interesting. I think the Supreme Court was kind of hunting for a case like this because they need to really clarify if schools can punish off-campus speech, because there's just this is happening all around the country, and districts don't really know what to do. And so I think that's the big reason why they took this case. We're gonna quickly, I just wanted to bring this up. You all hit on this already, but I wanted to lay out each side's arguments for you. You can see the school district is really worried about what will happen if they can't regulate off-campus speech. So for example, say a student published answers to a test online, right? School would not like that. They would probably consider that cheating and would want to do some regulating. Or a player on a team is criticizing their coach and undermining their authority. They probably want to do something about that. What about a student that just goes right outside the school, not on school property, but brings a bullhorn and is trying to disrupt the school environment there? Can they punish that? I don't know. If they rule for BL, maybe not. And then finally, the extreme examples of bullying. In my home state of Massachusetts, there was a very famous case where a young woman was encouraging a young man to kill himself, and he eventually did. And a lot of parents thought that if the school was able to step in, they might have been able to prevent some of that from happening, and especially other bullying and harassment, which we talked about already. Now, on the school side, or excuse me, on the student side, the student is going to be arguing tomorrow that the speech was in no way disruptive. This had nothing to do with school, so they shouldn't be punished for it. And if the school is allowed to regulate off-campus speech, there's going to be all kinds of unintended consequences. We talked about earlier that people might not even know that they're being recorded saying something about the school, and it might get back to the school and they might be punished for it. It also, they're going to argue, is an infringement on our First Amendment rights, and that even a very small amount of government punishment, like in this case, removing you from the cheerleading team, if that's meant to deter you from speaking, then that goes against our First Amendment right and our First Amendment principles. And so the lawyers for BL are going to really hammer home this point tomorrow. So we don't have time to do these other questions, but these are some that you can think about as we end. So first question that I was going to pose to you is, do you think that the lower courts have properly applied the Tinker rule? The Tinker test says that students have free speech rights in school as long as they don't cause a material and substantial disruption. And so you want to think about, as you're listening to the argument, did BL cause a material and substantial disruption? You might even hear a judge ask that question to either of the lawyers. Second, you're going to want to think about, where do we draw the line on what conduct schools can regulate outside of school? Should schools be able to regulate your conversations here at CU? Do I, as a former teacher and principal, have a responsibility to report any violations of our community guidelines to your school? Or should it be completely different what happens at CU versus what happens in school? Third, someone might bring this up during the conversation. Did the pandemic impact what being on campus means? So many of you were in Zoom school. this year? Does it mean you're on campus or in school if you're on a Zoom with your teacher and classmates? And if so, then maybe everything you do online is then part of school. So you might see someone make that argument. And then finally, we kind of talked about this already, but you can think about tonight or tomorrow which way you think the Supreme Court will rule, and what impact that will have on students' free speech rights. And so I encourage you all to listen to the argument tomorrow. I know some of you will be in school, ironically, but it's going to be at 10 a.m. Eastern time. That'll be live. You can go to the supremecourt.gov to listen to it. Also, the recording will be up hours later, so if you want to listen after school, that's fine too. If you have a little earbud in at school and you're listening during class, don't blame it on me. Any final questions before we end? We have 2 minutes.
I was just gonna ask, do we know when the ruling may come out?
It usually takes a couple months, which is kind of frustrating, but the case needs to be researched by the Supreme Court clerks. They need to write the whole opinion. So my guess is we're in April, May, June, July. I guess it'll come out during midsummer. I'd say July, probably.
Okay.
Natalie?
Is there any way you could post the slideshow so that we could look over it later?
Yep, I'll post it in the announcements channel in Slack right after this, so you can grab it.
Great, thank you.
I noticed in, I think, one of the CU community guidelines or something we had to sign, that it says that CU has, they can remove you from the program if they don't like, if you guys don't like what we post online or what we're doing, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah,
your conduct, we can take action based on your conduct outside of CU if it comes to us. And that's because we are a private organization, a nonprofit 501c3. And so we don't have to abide by the same rules as a public school does.
Okay. And 501c3 organizations, I've noticed that there's even like the Turning Point USA and stuff, and they claim to be like nonpartisan, but I find that hard to believe that that's like, obviously we know that's not true, but I find it hard to believe that that can even be a 501c3 organization.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they, not to get too down into this rabbit hole, but I think they do get away with a lot that a 501c3 probably shouldn't. I think you all know at CU that we try to be as nonpartisan as humanly possible, and it's hard. It can definitely be hard, I think, when other organizations also have the same designation, 501c3, but are obviously not nonpartisan. All right, thank you so much, everybody. I hope you enjoy listening to the case tomorrow. I really appreciated all your comments. This was wonderful. Have a great rest of your night. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.